Whispers from the walls. In my early 20s, I rented an old cottage on the outskirts of a small town. Nestled between tall trees with only the sound of rustling leaves and chirping birds, it was the peaceful sanctuary I was looking for after my hectic college life. The first few days in the cottage were idyllic. However, things took a turn when I began hearing faint whispers at night. At first, I dismissed them as products of my overactive imagination. But as nights turned into weeks, the whispers grew louder, more distinct. Watch her, see her, know her. The voice was persistent. Terror crept in when I noticed that personal things started to shift places. A picture moved from the mantel to the table, my diary turned up on a different page, and my curtains were left ajar when I distinctly remembered closing them. Determined to find out the source, I set up cameras in the main areas of the house. The next morning, I skimmed through the footage, expecting to catch a break-in, but what I saw chilled me to the bone. Around 3 a.m., from a small ventilation grate near the floor, a pair of eyes peered into the room. Moments later, the grate slowly lifted, and a hand emerged, wandering around, touching my things. But the worst was yet to come. The hand retreated, and a voice whispered, the very words I had heard so many times. Watch her. See her. Know her. The grate then slid back into place. My cottage had a stalker living inside its walls. I called the police and they conducted a thorough search. Behind the walls, they discovered a labyrinth of narrow pathways, just wide enough for a person to crawl through. It seemed the cottage was riddled with hidden nooks, and someone had been using them to watch me. Inside, they found discarded food wrappers, torn pictures of me, and a makeshift bed. But the stalker was nowhere to be found. The police surmised he must have an exit point somewhere which allowed him to escape before they arrived. I moved out the very same day. The thought of returning, even to collect my things, was unbearable. I hired movers and left the town altogether, relocating to a bustling city, hoping to drown my fears amidst its sounds. Years passed, but the memory of the cottage and its eerie hidden passages remained fresh. My life moved on. I got a new job, made friends, and even started dating someone. One evening, while my boyfriend Jake and I were having dinner, he mentioned wanting to renovate his apartment. He talked about breaking down a wall to make his living room bigger. I felt a shiver go down my spine at the thought of walls, but brushed it aside, attributing it to my traumatic past. Jake began the renovations soon after. One day I received a frantic call from him. He sounded breathless, panic evident in his voice. "Come over," was all he said. I rushed to his apartment. The living room wall had been demolished, revealing a dark, narrow space behind. Inside, there was a familiar setup: a makeshift bed, food wrappers, and pictures. Pictures of me. The police were called in once again. They discovered that this hidden space connected to other apartments in the building as well, a secret network used by someone to move undetected. But just like the last time, the stalker remained elusive. The realization was overwhelming. This person, whoever it was, had followed me from the cottage to the city, from one residence to another. Despite changing my life, my location, my habits, I hadn't escaped him. Desperate for answers, I turned to the one thing I hadn't changed: my phone. I hired a cybersecurity expert, hoping that if technology was the stalker's way in, it could also be his undoing. Hours turned into days, but my expert finally had a breakthrough. My phone had been hacked. A stealth app, cleverly disguised, had been transmitting my every move to an anonymous user. And the source of this breach? A link I had clicked on years ago from an email titled, "See who's stalking you on social media." The irony was painful. Using the app's data, the police traced the anonymous user to a nearby location. An arrest was made. The stalker turned out to be an old classmate, someone I barely remembered. His obsession, born out of a casual college conversation, had grown into a monstrous stalking spree that spanned years and towns. With him behind bars, I finally felt the weight lift. But the scars remain. I'm wary of technology, of quiet spaces, of walls that might hide secrets. As we gather around this campfire, remember my story. In our quest to stay connected, to know and be known, we sometimes forget the shadows that lurk just out of sight, the eyes that watch, and the walls that whisper. Be careful of where you click. Not every secret passage is made of bricks. Some are digital, waiting for you to unknowingly walk right in. The reflections we don't see. It started innocuously enough. A friend request on social media. A friendly hello from a username I didn't recognize. As an amateur photographer with a growing online following, I was used to strangers reaching out to appreciate my work. The username mirrorman_92 began leaving comments on my posts, always flattering. "Your vision is so clear," he once wrote. Another time, "The way you capture light reminds me of how you light up a room." I appreciated the compliments, but that second message felt a tad intimate. One afternoon as I walked in the park, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a direct message from mirrorman_92 with a picture attached. The image was of me, taken from a distance, capturing a candid moment of me photographing a bird. The message read, "Always a joy watching an artist at work." Chills ran down my spine. Was he here, watching me? I quickly scanned the vicinity but saw no one suspicious. I decided it was best to block him. Weeks went by without incident, until one evening, while reviewing photos on my camera, I found pictures I didn't remember taking. Candid shots of myself, cooking at home, sleeping even in the shower. My heart raced. The realization that someone had been inside my house was paralyzing. I immediately called the police. They scanned my apartment for any signs of forced entry but found nothing. On my bathroom mirror, however, was a single word written from the inside: "Watched." The police suggested it might be a good idea to stay somewhere else for a while. So I went to my parents' house in the countryside. It was isolated, surrounded by acres of dense woods. The perfect place to escape my mysterious stalker. The first few days were calming. I took long walks in the woods, my camera in tow. But peace turned to horror when I reviewed the photos. In every picture, just at the edge of the frame, was a faint silhouette of a man. It was as if he was always just out of sight, but forever watching. Desperate to end this torment, I decided to confront him. Armed with a flashlight and my camera, I ventured into the woods at night, the very idea making my heart thud against my ribs. Hours felt like minutes, and just as I was about to turn back, I stumbled upon a clearing. And there, in the middle, stood a massive ornate mirror illuminated by moonlight. Approaching it hesitantly, I noticed hundreds of photos scattered around it, all of me from various stages of my life. As I got closer to the mirror, my reflection seemed off. It moved independent of me. Suddenly, my reflection began to contort, morphing into a tall, lanky figure, mirrorman_92. He stepped out, standing face to face with me. "You can't escape a reflection," he whispered, his voice a chilling monotone. With adrenaline pumping, I snapped a picture of him, the flash temporarily blinding him. Using this momentary advantage, I ran back towards my parents' house. Once safely inside, I barricaded the door and called the police. While waiting for them, curiosity got the better of me, and I reviewed the picture I took. The image made my stomach drop. It wasn't the mirror man in the photo. It was just me, standing alone in the clearing, looking terrified. The police found no mirror in the woods, nor any photos. They searched the woods for any sign of the stalker, but came up empty-handed. I moved cities, changed my name, and gave up photography. The fear of capturing something unintended terrified me. But the story doesn't end there. Years later, while visiting a local museum, I came across an exhibit on ancient mirrors. One of the descriptions caught my attention. Mirrors from the 16th century, believed to capture and imprison souls. Many reported seeing reflections acting on their own, leading to legends of mirrors being gateways to other realms. At the bottom of the exhibit, a familiar chill crawled up my spine. It read, "Donated by username mirrorman_92. As we sit around this campfire tonight, look into the flames, the water, or any reflective surface nearby. But always remember, the reflection looking back might not always be yours. Sometimes we're not stalked by the people behind us, but by the ones in front, the reflections we don't see." Shadow in the Static. I've always been a bit of a technology geek. When I was 18, I dabbled in building custom radios and setting up my own little FM station in the small town where I grew up, broadcasting indie music, weather updates, and random musings. It was a passion that only a handful of loyal listeners appreciated. About a month into my radio gig, I began receiving interference on my broadcasts, an odd staticky undercurrent that I couldn't identify. With each passing day, the interference seemed to evolve, forming a rhythm, almost like a coded message. One night, as I was closing up, the radio buzzed to life by itself. Cutting through the static was a deep, distorted voice. "I hear you, Andy," it crackled. My blood ran cold. Not many people knew about my makeshift radio station, and even fewer knew my real name. Shaken, I switched off the radio and packed up. As I left my makeshift studio in the garage, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. Every shadow seemed menacing, every gust of wind like a whispered threat. The interference and the voice continued for days. Every time I tried to broadcast, that eerie static would commence, followed by the cryptic voice. Sometimes it would merely repeat my name. Other times it would describe what I was doing, right down to the color of my shirt or the song I was about to play. It was as if someone was watching me, every second, every minute. I decided to confront this mysterious entity. One night on air, I said, "Who are you? What do you want?" There was a long pause before the voice replied, "Close. So close." Panicking, I shut down the station. That night, lying in bed, I heard it again. The familiar static from my radio downstairs, followed by the voice, "Outside, watching." Unable to bear it any longer, I decided to involve the police. They were skeptical at first, but my recordings of the eerie voice convinced them to look into it. They stationed a cop near my house for surveillance, but the stalker seemed to be one step ahead. The moment a police car was in sight, the broadcasts would cease. And the moment they left, the eerie voice would return, mocking and taunting me. Feeling isolated and desperate, I reached out to a community of radio enthusiasts online. I shared my story, hoping someone might have answers. That's when I received a private message from a user named Freckmaster. He explained that sometimes, old radio frequencies can pick up imprints, echoes from the past, especially if linked with intense emotions or events. He suggested that my equipment might be tuned to such a frequency. He asked me specific questions about my radio setup and the modifications I'd made. As I answered, a chilling realization dawned upon me. The interference began after I'd added an old amplifier to my setup, which I'd bought from a garage sale in town. Freckmaster's next message confirmed my fears. The amplifier belonged to a local radio enthusiast named Robert, who was rumored to have stalked several people in town through his broadcasts before mysteriously disappearing years ago. His equipment was sold off, but stories floated around that Robert's spirit still lingered, seeking new victims through the very machine he loved. I immediately disconnected the amplifier and decided to get rid of it. That night, however, the static returned, louder and more insistent than ever. The voice, distorted and angry, screamed, "You can't escape!" Terrified, I decided to confront this entity head-on. Armed with sage, which I'd read could ward off spirits, and the cursed amplifier, I drove to the old radio tower on the outskirts of town where Robert had made his final broadcast. As I neared the tower, my own car radio sprang to life, blasting static. I could hear Robert's voice growing more and more frantic, overlapping with echoes of other voices, his past victims. Mustering all my courage, I began burning the sage, reciting a prayer. Then, taking a deep breath, I smashed the amplifier against the ground. An ear-piercing scream erupted from the radio, echoing across the deserted field. And then, silence. The static and the voice were gone. I returned home, exhausted but relieved. The following days were quiet, the haunting voice of the stalker no longer a threat. But the experience changed me forever. The equipment is all packed away now. The world of radio, once a passion, now serves as a chilling reminder that some frequencies are best left unexplored. As we sit by this campfire, let my tale be a warning. Sometimes the past has a way of echoing into our present, and there are voices, lost in the static, waiting for the right frequency to make themselves heard. Always be careful of what you tune into, You might not like what talks back.